Welcome everyone to Coaching in Session. My name is Michael Rearden, and I'll be your mindset coach today. And today we're going to be talking about early education. If you know anything about education, early education is going to be one of the critical aspects in a child's development, because from age 0 to 7, that is when they're going to be learning quite a lot of information, especially from their environment and from the behaviors around them. And then that's where they learn their value system and they learn about beliefs. There's a lot that goes on in the brain that we might not be aware of as parents, that we might not be aware as even educators if we never really studied the brain and the process of learning. Learning is one of those things that doesn't stop at a certain age. We don't graduate from school and say, okay, I'm done learning. That's the opposite. We continue to learn. Even in the jobs that we have for years and years and years, we continue to learn from them, from people around us. But there's an issue that's going on in the world, and we're learning from social media. We're learning from mainstream media. We're learning from people who have opinions that might not be appropriate for young minds. We might be learning about different types of adult problems that the brain might not be mentally ready to handle. Not saying that the brain can't learn these things or that it shouldn't learn these things. I believe that learning should not be limited to age, but by the quality of what that learning did. So for example, if I was going to learn about war and history, how does that make me feel at the end of the day? We might think war is bad. We might think that these people are bad because they started a war with someone. But in reality, the only thing we're teaching is history. And I believe there's a difference between teaching proper information and then teaching opinionated information. And this is something that I'm seeing quite often, especially from teachers today. They're teaching their classroom things that are away from the curriculum. They're teaching them about popular beliefs versus beliefs that are going to be interesting to them. Because I don't think many students or many kids are going to be worried about who's going to be president. Maybe if that child wants to be president, it might be a meaningful experience to them. But most kids probably don't care. And I know there's this video after video, TikTok after TikTok of teachers saying that they're going to teach their class this thing that's so unique. And I know it's causing an uproar with many of the parents. And that's why a lot of parents are choosing homeschooling versus going to the public schools. But regardless of where you get your education, the way we learn or understanding the way we learn is going to be quintessential to counteract any wrong teaching that we might not want to teach them or any inappropriate teachings that we might deem. Again, it's going to be one of those things that are going to be different for every person, because what I value might be different than if someone else values something different. We have to understand that education is a blanket in the sense of we are giving all of this information. It's a large amount of information. And what sticks is what is going to resonate with the child, with how the educator, the teacher was able to bring that information to the classroom. Because if a teacher is bland, most likely the kids are checked out. They're just thinking about going out to recess or going home to play a video game. They're not necessarily worried about, oh, I have to know algebra or trigonometry. But regardless of what children learn or how they learn, we need to understand how they're developing, where they are today, and where they'll be tomorrow. It is not that we're trying to force them in a certain path. Our kids are not our mistake fixers. We want to give our kids the best life possible, but the way we do that is not by telling them what to do. And today I'm bringing on a guest, Richard Cohen, who's going to be an educator in early childhood. And we are going to be diving into how kids learn, the methods, the process, what can be changed, and then, of course, how can parents play a role in their kids' education? Because if we understand what education is and the outcome, the way we think and the way we move becomes a little bit different. So let's get into that interview with Richard and myself. Welcome, Richard Cohen, to Coaching in Session. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing well. Thank you so much for coming on. How you and I met was very interesting because we met on Facebook just through like a general post discussion. It maybe got a little bit heated in the sense of we were kind of speaking our opinions, speaking our beliefs. And oftentimes we lose that cordiality in conversation. And I think that's one of the lost skills that we have as people, to be cordial, to be open, to understand that people have different opinions. And the work you do as an educator is helping people, I think, understand their value, their voice, and then going after it. I have you on today as an educator, and we're going to be talking about a little bit about the work you do, but in your own words, can you explain what you do as an educator and how you help people?
Sure. So I have been for about 40 years now an early childhood education professional. So proud to call myself an early childhood education person. And so what that means is that way back in the day, I have been an infant teacher, a toddler teacher, a preschool teacher, a pre-kindergarten teacher, a kindergarten teacher, a child care center director. And then most of those years, then after all that sort of humble beginning, was spent in high-level leadership positions in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere, leading national and international programs, all that relate to early childhood education and early childhood educators and their professional preparation and development. So degrees and certificates and credentials are sort of the areas of my work. And then amid all of that, for the last 30-something years, I travel all over the world delivering the keynote address at early childhood conferences. And I'm invited to facilitate early childhood professional development trainings, workshop sessions. I'm invited to consult with programs to help them improve the quality of their offerings. There's a whole lot that I've been doing for a long time. Oh, well, the other thing is I have a social media presence that I've had for about 10 years now called Zen and the Art of Early Childhood. And that's on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and YouTube. And it was there that you and I met on my Facebook page. And, my whole life's work has been less about me being a teacher and more about me being a facilitator. And so while you were kind of maybe surprised by my cordiality or civility in our interaction on that social media page, that's literally what I do for a living, which is facilitate others, expanding their thinking on various topics and expanding mine in so doing. And so having that conversation with you is just, sadly, it's not the norm in our social media world, but it is sort of the norm for me.
When you have to compare your early childhood learning versus your leadership training for personal development for teachers and educators, and maybe even people like in like superintendents, things like that, like administrators in the school system, what is the greatest difference that you notice when teaching them?
The greatest difference between working directly with teachers and working with leaders, superintendents and directors and folks in leadership.
What is the difference between teaching children and then teaching adults?
Well, I was greatly influenced by a woman who ended up being my master's thesis chair. Her name is Elizabeth Jones, or Betty Jones. And one of her greatest points that she made is that any work we do with adults who serve young children should be patterned after the work we do with young children. And that part of our job is to make that explicit for adult participants, so that in the ways that I'm interacting with them. So, for example, when I said to you earlier, Michael, that facilitation is what I do. If you were an early childhood professional, I might say, and now let's look at how exactly what I did with you is what you would do with a group of 2, 3, or 4-year-olds. What does facilitation look like with them? And how do you create a similar sense of safety and holding space for self-expression? How do you do that with 3-year-olds? And what did you notice in how I just did that with you? So hopefully, my answer to your question is, hopefully there's not a difference between the two if I'm doing it well.
When I was in college, I started out college 2006. That's when I graduated high school, went off to college. And I went to community college in Connecticut, Bridgeport, Connecticut, went to Housatonic Community College. And they had a music program where it was kind of disheveled, I guess you can say, or just torn apart. It wasn't taken care of. There was no leadership in there.
Yes.
And that was the right time when I got there because I wanted to learn music. I started learning guitar. My advisor, he was actually an early childhood or like maybe a preschool teacher, but I think it was early childhood teacher. And he was fantastic. He was fantastic with them. He had a great demeanor. He was very caring. He was Jamaican, if that means anything. He used a lot of rhythm where he was using drums and he used music to really get a hold of them. His classroom management was impeccable. I learned so much from him. When I was going for music as my major, it was always to be a teacher. So I was going to be a music teacher down the road. When I was there in 2006 to 9 at that college, I learned about the kids there. It's a different world we live in today, especially with technology. It doesn't have to be 2006. It could be 2000 if you want to go back that far.
Okay.
What is some of the changes that you see in early childhood learning from 10, 20, wherever you want to take it years ago to today?
First off, as an aside, I would point out that I teach at Manchester Community College in Connecticut, sister to Housatonic. And in less than a year, Housatonic and our college will be one college called CT State. And you and I will be even more connected. But in any case, so small world. Good to know you. I was thinking about, and maybe this is a tangent here, but I was thinking about, you mentioned your professor and how he was from Jamaica. And you, as an aside, you sort of said, and if that means anything. And I began thinking, well, without making a broad generalization about any group, what I know about Jamaica and Jamaican Americans is that music is an integral part of their culture and their raising when they were children. And so it's not a surprise to me that someone for whom music is part of their identity would end up teaching music to others and to children. And so that sort of takes me to your question, in that it seems to me that there was a time when we were all more connected to music, whether that was 20 years ago, 100 or 500 years ago, when we all lived tribally and music was part of our communication, our self-expression, our cultural identities. Since I came on the scene in the early 80s, when the people who came before me invited me into the community of early educators, and how song and dance and music making is such an integral part of the first years of life. I took that on and I embraced that. When I run around and I do those keynote addresses at conferences that I mentioned earlier, I always get 1,000 people at a time up and dancing and singing and playing and being foolish, because that's part of, to me, the fabric of human life, of what it means to be a human. What I've noticed now in these last decades, as we sit here in 2022, is so much of that feels to me like it's been lost or devalued. In the time that we human beings now spend looking at screens instead of making eye contact with other people, in the time that we now spend sitting side by side with people playing a video game or watching a screen, rather than making eye contact, playing across from each other. Or, I just think of that whole wonderful culture of singing and dancing as a communal experience, and such joy that comes of it, that for me, subjectively, anecdotally, seems to have kind of been lost a bit. It saddens me and concerns me for the future, because we're just focusing on music because that was the nature of your question. But music and eye contact and social connection are all parts of what make us human. I seem to notice that in today's society, those things have been devalued. And so I'm not sure what it's going to mean to be a human when our little ones today become the adults of tomorrow, if they're steeped in different values than we humans have been since before recorded time.
I completely agree with you in how education had changed from where it was to where it is today, and how things kind of got swept under the rug, where even the arts were in a constant battle. I know in the 2010s, it was always like, okay, we're going to take away funding from where? From the arts. So they were going to take away art class, music class. They needed gyms. So of course, gym was still going to be there, but art and music were on the chopping block. At the time, I was a music teacher, and I was just wondering, I was just curious, like, how could they take away something that's so beneficial for a child's development? Because music does so much more than provide entertainment, right? It's the kinesthetic feel also that many people don't understand, that their kid is moving. They're learning confidence. If you look at school, a typical classroom, the child is sitting. They're sitting for a good majority of the day. And they have outlets, gym class, recess, music, where they get to move, where they're encouraged to move. But in a sense, we are discouraged from making moves or squirming. I remember when I was young, I would raise my hand and I would just go left and right, right? So I'm just trying to get the teacher's attention where I'm just making the most movement that is appropriate in the classroom. We are told to sit down. If you need something, raise your hand, and not to really be the thinkers or basically asking the questions that we want to know. We are almost nervous to say our piece because we don't want to be wrong. We don't want to be outcasted. Why do you think our school system is going down a road where conformity seems to be the only way? And I say only way, not to start an argument, but it seems to be the leading way that many people are going down. You don't have to use the word only in your mind. You can just say conformity is the way that the majority of schools or students are going down, where they're trying to be accepted by their peers, where they're, trying to make it through the school, whatever it be, however you interpret that question, kind of going down that path. And then I think it's going to lead to some really great conversation.
Well, get ready, because my answer is going to open up a whole socio-political can of worms. Earlier in this conversation, moments ago, when you were pondering why we seem to be cutting funding to the arts, but maintaining, if not strengthening it, for gym and sports. For me, that directly illustrates a culture of patriarchy and misogyny, in which males have more power than females. Sports are seen as a male pastime, where perhaps art, music are seen perhaps as more feminine pursuits. And so the people who control those funds and make the decisions about what should be funded and what should not be funded, generally still today in 2022, we know this, are old white men. They are making decisions about the lives of people who are not old and primarily around our country, not white. And they don't know what they don't know. They only know a specific way of looking at the world and how to maximize returns on investment. And in terms of what you spoke about led toward the topic of conformity, I'm going way big and way abstract, but we live in a capitalist society, and our educational system has been about for a very long time conformity, standardized experiences for children so that when they're done with their schooling years, they're all judged against the same continuum of standards and expected their outcomes when they have that high school degree or community college or college degree are deeply standardized and deeply tilted toward conformity in a system that, was originated around creating factory workers 120, 150 years ago. Now we're at a point in history where, and especially after this tremendous, I'll call it an interruption of the pandemic, there's an opportunity there to kind of look around and say, wait, is this now time to change what we've always been doing and rethink what it is we want from our educational systems? And I would say, yes, absolutely. But we live in a society where there's lots of people who work hard to make sure that we don't do that.
I always say one of the most dangerous phrases an educator can say is that it has always been done this way. Because if we say that, what happens is that we are not open to learn. We're not open to be flexible. And the children of our day and age today are different than they were 50 years ago.
Yes.
We have so much different technology that influences their development and the way they operate. Kids who are 4 years old probably know how to use an iPad better than someone who's 50.
That's right.
It's amazing how quick they adapt. There's a process to childhood development, whether they learn from their environment, the behaviors, identity is the last part. But then before that, it's values and beliefs. If we can we talk about the environment and the behavior aspect of childhood development? Maybe if we look at how it was and then what it is today, maybe we can offer ways that parents, because parents are going to be there with their kids and they do have a say in how their child is raised. So if they look at their environment, if they look at the behaviors that the kids see, everyone is on a smartphone, so kids learn that. If you ask a kid today, hey, let's make a phone call, they actually do this, versus me and you who probably do one of these. All right, this is the right way. This is the wrong way.
Right.
Would be someone who doesn't understand education because they don't have that experience yet. If we can, let's dive into childhood development, and then let's focus first on the environment and the behavior aspect.
One of the things we, meaning society, one of the things we know now in 2022 that we didn't know when I began working in the field of education is how human brains work. And the rise of the field of neurology and the field of learning around nervous systems has completely transformed what we now understand about how children and teenagers and adults, why they behave the way they do, and how those behaviors and learning are solidified or the foundations are built in the earliest years. So again, those people that are making those funding decisions are making it based on a surface look, a behavioral look. But we understand now better than ever that the behaviors arise through our nervous systems and originate in our minds and in our brains. To ask the question around children's behaviors and why we behave the way they do, we, as you say, need to think about the environment, and we need to know that the environment means the external world around us in our immediate space, the people with whom we are most attached or feel the most safe around and love the most, and how they behave, as you mentioned a moment ago, what they're modeling for us. But the environment is also our internal space within ourselves that in which the thinking and feeling occur that result in behaviors. In order to best serve healthy child or human development, we need to understand that human minds are most driven by meaningful experiences. So in my world, in early childhood education, or education in general, we talk about standardization of teaching and learning, like we mentioned earlier, and the standardized outcomes that we're immersed in, that young children and teachers are immersed in. And we now know so clearly, research shows us that it no longer makes sense to standardize everything because human minds are so diversely different, learn in different ways, and find different things meaningful. And so we know now that if a child is engaged in something meaningful, both the side of their brain that's used for analysis and the smaller part of that that's used for memorizing things collaborates with the creative side of the mind that imagines and oversees emotions and those kinds of things. Again, to just give an early childhood example, if I am sitting all my 3-year-olds down and saying, we're going to learn about the topic of autumn now because it's October, but what I know is the children in my care are interested in Disney princesses, Power Rangers, pirates, and I don't know what else. Neurology tells us, and I'm going to use a visual cue here, my hand, I'm using the small fingers pressed together, that the mind is going to learn this much. But if I expand my arms all the way out, we know that if we focus on meaningful topics and incorporate whatever it is we want them to learn within something that's meaningful, that activates their emotions, they'll learn so much more. If my goal is to help them learn reading and writing and mathematics and those things, it's foolish for me to force them to look at autumn when I can help them greatly expand their understanding of reading and writing and arithmetic if we do it through princesses and pirates and Power Rangers. And that's not what our education system right now values and kind of demands of our teachers, which is also why we're having this tremendous number of teachers who are leaving the field. Right now, as we speak, the teacher shortages are tremendous. And that is in part, there are many reasons why, but that's in part because the teachers now have all the research and the information about what young children, what minds of any age need to learn. And they know that they're working in a system that is ignoring that and, in fact, requiring them to do the opposite. And that's painful for us. And so many of us leave.
The wonderful thing about coaching a session and me asking questions is I ask very vague questions on purpose. So my guests can really interpret the way they feel and then answer accordingly to them. I'm not here to ask stringent questions that you didn't answer my question. I'm here to give you a guidepost and to see where the conversation goes. And I think that's where meaningful conversations can truly come from, because how you interpret something is different and how I see the world is different maybe. And your viewpoint is amazing on creating those meaningful experiences and how we have standardized testing and everything is standardized. When I was a teacher, I remember it was during STAR testing as one of the academic tests that were in my state at the time when I was a teacher. I don't know if they still have them because I've been out of the teaching game since 2016. I left in 2016. Teaching was very quick for me in the sense of public school. I think I started teaching in the public schools around 2009, just as an intern. And then I think I was full-time by 2012. What I can say is that you are correct. And the teachers are seeing what is going on, what they can't do. It's almost like their hands are handcuffed and they can't do the best job they can I saw many of the holes in the education system. And it was one of the reasons why I decided to do what I do today, where I'm a mindset coach. I do a lot of youth mentoring. There's a lot of holes that are there at the end of education. There's a lot of questions that children have or young adults have. What's next? They don't know how to act. They only know what they saw or what they were told, not what they felt. Because if we look again at an early age, imagination is one of those things that are crushed. We don't talk about the fairy Disney tales of the princesses and the princesses, or if someone wants to be an astronaut like Buzz Lightyear and go off into space or be a part of Paw Patrol saving the day. That is not a part of the system. That is not what kids need to learn. They need to learn about autumn and they need to learn about winter. They need to learn about arithmetic the stringent way. And then, of course, they have methods that they're trying now and like their box system math. I forget what it's called, but it's crazy.
Yes. Well, before this recording started, you and I had a little joke about how neither of us knew trigonometry.
Yeah.
Right? But that's a required part of public education. And now I scratch my head and think of all the hundreds of things I want children to learn before they leave high school. Trigonometry is not even on my list. Yeah. Where did that come from? And why are we still holding that up as a high value?
Because it's always been done that way.
That's right.
And it's the most dangerous way that a person can think, especially an educator or someone who's empowered to make the choices for educators, administrators, things like that along those lines. But then it goes even beyond them. Sometimes I think like the superintendents, like they have some flexibility. They offer some flexibility for their teachers, but it's still the curriculum. It's still the state standards. And it's difficult to get around it. And I remember when I was a teacher, I had a wonderful cooperating teacher. He was amazing with the kids. He was magnetic and I learned from him. My director, he didn't necessarily like the magnetic teacher, right? He was a very old school, traditional type of teacher. So how he does things or did things was different than how the current teacher was doing things. The current teacher was looking at the children versus the director was looking at the system. It's a big difference when you look at the map, but you're not looking in front of you. So you're just looking at the map and you're just walking, but you're not looking in front of you to see if you're going in the right direction. And I think that is what's happening in our school system is that we're given a map, but we're not looking at where we're going with that, right? We're not looking at where we end up until we finally get to the end and we're like, well, this is not where I am. Oh, well, if they're 18, good luck, kids. So they're totally unprepared for the world. And what I tend to do with these young minds is I try to re-spark their imagination, re-spark their curiosity, and to answer any questions that they might have, because our world today leaves room for a lot of questions because we're told what to think in a sense. Where I started off the conversation today, we lost that cordiality. And when we look at a situation, whether it be public, private, what's on social media, what's popular, trending, we make a choice very quickly. And oftentimes that choice is not influenced by our feelings. It's going to be influenced by what the majority of people are feeling. And so we are easily influenced by the masses versus looking on the inside, believing what we believe, having a value system and making sure we uphold that value system, and then having the character to keep on going through with it. Because if my friends are doing something that I think is wrong, I might not say anything, because it's going to make me an outcast. And if we know anything about human nature, especially for peer acceptance, especially in teenagers, I mean, it's even before that too, but especially teenagers in middle school, is that they crave for that peer acceptance. If we had to help children understand that they are unique and individual and they have something to offer to the world, what are some ways that you help them shine? So when a parent is listening to this podcast, when maybe a teenager is listening to this podcast and they are going to hear this advice on how to allow themselves to be themselves again versus what society has says to be standard, to be like everyone else, what are some ways that you help people reclaim themselves?
First of all, I want to just go back momentarily and point out that when you described what you do, helping re-spark young people, and you spoke earlier about how you handle this podcast and you ask vague or open-ended questions, I'm really struck by how similar kind of our jobs are. We both use the same skill sets with similar goals, even though our areas of focus appear to be different. But we are both skilled facilitators. And I would imagine that there's core belief that you and I share about not controlling others and instead just creating a space where they can come forward and, as you say, shine, and that's a different skill set, creating that space and allowing it to happen than most folks who want to try to control the outcome and control what the child is going to become. So for me, as an early childhood educator, to answer the question where we left off a moment ago, what do we do? At least in my world, the answer is very simple, or seemingly simple, and that's play. If we let young children and people play, probably the young people you work with as well, they will discover what they need to discover when they need to discover it. In my field, I would say in the right developmental moment, they'll learn what they need to learn. And that's a really different way of doing early childhood education than the way we're taught, which is sit the children down, hold up flashcards, give them coloring sheets, tell them that they can't use a purple crayon to draw the stem of a flower. Stems are green. What we're talking about there is convergent thinking versus divergent thinking. We're in a society that values convergent thinking, or problems that have one right answer. 2 + 2 will always be 4. And our educational system is based on making sure children know the right answers to the question. Divergent thinking is about creative problem solving, realizing that there are many ways to address a challenge and that there are many things about yourself that are waiting to be discovered if only you're given the time and space to do it. And so we know in early childhood education that we need to let young children play. That means we need to give them lots of time, because we now know because of neurology, I'll call them deeper parts of the mind that don't get activated until a good 15, 20 minutes into a play session. So I need to give, or my National Association for the Education of Young Children says, children need 45 minutes of uninterrupted play every day and an additional 75 minutes outside. Those times are based on neurological research that tells us how long it takes a mind to get to a state of flow or a state of deep play where they can access the parts of their brains that will allow them to discover new things about themselves and about the world. So we have to give them time. We have to give them space. A great preschool classroom has all different areas in the room: a math area, reading area, science area, block area, building, art. They need to be given time to explore those areas when they see fit. On Monday, this little one feels like she wants to spend time in the art area, but by Thursday, she's drawn to the block area. If I try to control all of that, I am working against the child's own motivations. As you do with the young people in your life, I know you follow their lead rather than trying to control where you think they should go. So we give them the time and the space to play. We're there to facilitate, to ask perhaps vague or open-ended questions to further their thinking, but never to demand, require anything, other than maybe health and safety needs, so that whoever it is, in the first 5 years of life, they've only been on the planet for 1,000, 2,000 days. And my job is to help those petals open up on their own, not force them open, let them bloom and blossom. I can't make them do that. I can just hold the space for that to happen. And the most important medium in early childhood education is play, which, to tie it back to what we were talking about earlier, includes lots of singing and dancing and music.
I often tell this story to educators when we're talking about this aspect, because it's important for parents and for teachers and for whoever to understand this aspect of learning, especially in a young child. There was a mother who was taking her son, and it was raining that day, and they were just walking. They were about to cross the street, and there was a huge puddle. The kid sees the puddle, and the kid's like, "Oh, look at that puddle. It looks like fun." Now, the mom doesn't want to deal with wet socks and a wet child, so she says, "Come here, go around the puddle," right? She stopped that child from learning so many different things. Physics, understanding of the feeling of wet socks, right? There's a lot to it. But as adults, sometimes we look at convenience. We don't want our kids to be dirty, so don't play in the mud, don't go out in the rain, things like that. And we're so quick to say, well, this is easy for me. Here's a phone. Here's an iPad. Parents typically will take the more simplified path if they don't have the flexibility. And most parents don't have the flexibility today. A lot of parents, especially in the Western household, is that both parents are working to make ends meet. There's not much time, and parents are stressed. So they're coming home and they're not necessarily worried about their child's education because the kid just got back from school. So they're expecting the teachers to do a great job. Mom and dad are checked out. So they still might have to make dinner. Maybe dad has to go out, cut the lawn, right? Whatever it be, they have other things to do. But then at the end of the day, decision fatigue sets in. Let's just sit down and watch some TV. Let's not go to the park and, go outside for 45 or 75 minutes to play, because that right there is going to be taxing on the parent. When in reality, if they look at what they gain intrinsically from it, it's going to be different than if they just sat on the sofa with their child or their kids. It's challenging for parents today to be effective educators when they don't have any formal training. The pandemic showed how clear it is that parents are not equipped to be educators. Not saying that a parent doesn't have the best intentions or wishes for their child. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that teachers, we go through several years of education. Most teachers go off to get master's degrees, higher education, to learn how children learn, to learn about the brain, and then, of course, to be the best teacher they can be every single day. Because it's challenging, especially for teachers, to have a classroom full of 25, 30 kids and then try to touch base with every single one of them. When it comes to education, education doesn't end at the end of the school day. It's going to end when we die, right? So we are learning every single day. And it's important that parents, they understand that too. What is some advice that you can give parents to help their children to grow past the school day? Some methods that they can use or enact to help their children keep on learning and to grow into the spaces that the school might not reach.
Well, I got stuck on the phrase keep on learning for a moment as I was processing your question. I'm not sure if that's my greatest wish for parents, to have children keep on learning in the time that they're not in school. On the other hand, as you say, we're always learning. We're always in process, and just being awake and living is learning. So in that sense, I'm with you. As an early educator, I come back to play. Let your children play. Play with your children. Don't direct their play. Play alongside them. Read to your children. Read with your children. Spend quiet time together with your children without screens. Play with them in ways that encourage eye contact between you and your child. We literally know now, we have scads of research now telling us how eye contact shapes human identity, especially in the first years of life, and how much less eye contact we're clocking now than human beings ever in the history of our species. And that's shaping us in a very different direction, in a direction that devalues social connections, for example, as we look toward a future where those connections are going to be more important than ever and are threatened by screen time and social media time and all those things that take us away from human interaction, in real life human interaction, that it could involve human touch, human eye contact, and moments of intimacy. I guess I would say to parents, take stock of your relationship with your child. In what ways are you cultivating intimacy with your child? Just those lovely moments where your child feels, without even you having to say the words, they get the messages like, I am safe, I am loved, I am fully accepted for who I am. This person loves me unconditionally. A lot of parents think to themselves, a lot of parents that I talk with think, oh, my child knows those things. Well, what exactly is it you're doing, sort of behaviorally, that sends those messages? Do you actually say the words? What are you doing in terms of your facial and body expressions that send that message to your child? Oh, well, I never thought of it that way. I'm just busy driving them to ballet and soccer and t-ball, and they're in the back seat and we have conversations. That's nice. But what else can you do? That's great. And what else can you do in your day that might put some more intimate, playful, joyous moments with your child? Sing with them, dance with them, sit and draw next to them. Let me go back to one basic concept called open-ended versus closed-ended. If you've only given your child closed-ended materials, like a toy where you press this button and it always makes the same sound, or a transformer that always transforms into the same Optimus Prime or whatever, that's fine. But if you want to encourage that creativity, then you need to just give them blocks, pots and pans, lids, a bucket of water, things that are open-ended, which means that the child can choose the direction the material can go, how long they want to use them, and when and how that play experience ends. And sit with them, fill up the bath with bubbles, sit with them and play bubble play or whatever that is. Think in terms of open-ended play. Think in terms of real joy and how you can share that with your child. And I get why we don't. So many of us are in survival mode these days, and we don't have time to think about thriving. We're just trying to get through the day, get the food done, get them bathed, get them into bed, get ready for the next day, and do it all over again. So one of the many things that I work on with people is mindfulness and breathing and slowing down your mind, because that's the first step, I believe, in being able to get out of that rat race and that worrying mind telling you all the things you've got to get done as quickly as possible, and to be able to just be present with your child. Young children live in the present moment, not in the past or the future. We grown-ups spend more time ruminating about our past or worrying about our futures. And so sometimes it takes some breathing and slowing down to get us to remember that we're not in the present where our children are, and we need to get ourselves there so that ourselves and our children can connect and have fun together.
I love everything you said, from how parents just have to be more mindful to just the aspect of play, the different types of play, whether it be with blocks or with sand or with a toy that you press a button with. Like, I'm sure many parents don't even recognize that. They just understand it's occupying my child. My child likes this. The thing about the brain, the thing about education is that it's difficult to learn everything and to fulfill every single role. That's why there's so many different types of teachers. You're going to have your different types of teachers in your arts, your art teacher, your gym teacher, your PE teacher. And even in the early grades of elementary, the third grade has 3 teachers in that school. They're going to say, well, this teacher is going to be the math teacher. And so they're having the kids go to math class versus one teacher teaching everything, because they have found that that is more effective than if they had said, okay, one teacher is going to teach everything in one classroom and the kids never leave the classroom. Well, it's about imagination. It's about being open. It's about seeing the world for what it truly is rather than just the box that they're in. And as parents, we have to be aware of the world that we're in just as much as our kids are in. Because when we can do that, then we can start to see how our child is developing, and we can move them in the way that they want to move versus in the way that we tell them to move or the way that society is telling them to move. We allow them to be themselves. And when we allow them to be themselves and to continue on with that imagination and that creative mind, they develop critical thinking skills. They develop the ability to be unique in the sense of the world is telling me to be this, but I'm choosing to be this because this is what makes me feel right. There's so much that we don't do in our days because of time, because of other commitments. But when it comes to children, when it comes to education, we have to do our utmost to make sure that they have the best path, that we give them the tools they need to grow emotionally, mentally. Because if we don't, later on in life, they're going to have these emotional blocks where they might not know how to love. They might not, like looking at the educational aspect, they might not know how to do their taxes or balance their checkbook. Is because we're teaching them things that they might not necessarily need in their life, especially if they have a unique perspective. So education is more than just this conversation. And I want to thank Richard for coming on, spending some time with me today. I encourage you to reach out to him. He has a wealth of wisdom and knowledge that he can share with parents, with educators. That's really going to open up some eyes. And I think right now in our world, what we need is an awakening per se of this is what's happening. This is what could be better. And then start to make small changes, because if we know anything about change, the brain doesn't like change. So if we do it incrementally, if we do it systematically, saying, all right, it's going to take maybe 10 to 15 years to change our system versus how we're doing it now. Oh, this would be a good idea. This would be a good idea. But in reality, we're just still going down that path of standardized or a systematic type of approach to education, when really it should be more pragmatic. Richard, if I can from you, please give us any last words, and then please tell the audience where they can find you.
Well, I'll just say that, the thought that came to mind a moment ago when you were speaking about parents wanting the best for their children. I think we all agree on that, but it's a trap in that we think best means the best school, the most extracurricular activities. We believe that best means highest levels of success. And in fact, the real truth, the wisdom lies in knowing that the strategy is counterintuitive. But the way to help your children have the best life is actually to slow down and spend time with them and connect with them. Even though your mind, society is telling your mind to add things, do things, control things. The truth is, if you want what's best for your child, do the opposite of that. Don't listen to that thought pattern. So I guess that would be my final piece of advice. And when in doubt, play. If any of your folks want to find me, my website is Richard Cohen, that's COHEN.com. And they can find me at Zen and the Art of Early Childhood on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And I'm happy to be of support to anyone who might want to reach out to me. And I thank you for inviting me onto your show, Michael.
Of course. I want to thank you for spending some time with us today, sharing your wisdom again, and then opening up that conversation that needs to be had. Because if we keep going down the path that we're going down, we're just going to continue to be pushing out children who are not aware of their potential. And I find that to be a huge crutch in our society because there's so much that they can do, and the limiting beliefs that we give them are not beneficial. Again, thank you so much, Rich, for coming on. Great conversation. All right, everyone. I'd like to thank my guest, Richard Cohen, for coming on Coaching in Session. As you can see, we had a great conversation about many different aspects of education. And it's difficult to talk about education in one episode of a podcast because education is just so wide. And we can go down so many different paths. And the path that we went on today was dealing with looking at how children learn, and then looking at some of the problems that our current system has, and then effective ways that parents can implement better learning for their child. Because if we understand anything about our world today, we are very occupied. We're busy with everything that needs our attention, especially our smartphones. Our smartphones demand our attention. We're getting a notification from every single app that we have, maybe. YouTube said we have a new video we have to watch. We have a new message or a new like on Facebook or on TikTok or on Instagram. And we're constantly looking at those platforms for something that sparks our mind or that we can enjoy or indulge in. But really what we should indulge in is in the moment that we're in, because that moment can be something powerful. It could be more powerful than a like. It could be more powerful than an Instagram reel or a TikTok video, especially if you're a parent. Because when you're on your phone, low be it if they're teenagers, maybe if they're on their phone, you can be watching similar things to create that common experience. But when they're young, in their early stages of development, that play aspect, that paying attention to them aspect, and seeing how they move, and then following their lead. I remember when I was a swim coach, I would always just begin the session figuring out where they were. Sometimes I would get a student and they would say, Michael, I don't want to swim today. I say, good thing, I don't want to swim either. And it's just so funny because the parent would look at me saying, you're not going to swim today? I'm paying all this money for you to swim, to teach them how to swim. But I'm not going to push them or pull them in the direction that saying, hey, we're in swim class, you need to swim, because then that's going to create friction. So I do it in a way of follow me this way. So I say, you know what, we're not going to swim today. That's a lot of work. And they're like, yeah, it is a lot of work. And then I say, show me some kicks. And we begin the process. Education can be magical, and how people develop can be amazing. And it's such an interesting topic for anyone who's interested in the psychology of the mind and the brain. Because if we can understand how we operate, what makes us tick, what makes us move, what makes us motivated and passionate, we're going to be adults that understand where to move. Because many of the adults that I work with, they feel stuck. They feel lost. They're full of fear in the sense of they don't want to make the wrong mistake, or they're filled with fear because they're going against what they learned or what will always have worked for them. We can choose to continue to be in the rat race of the world of education, or we can say, you know what? I want to make a difference. I want to make a change. And that change is going to begin with you. How you think, how you move, how you operate. And if you need help with that, I'm sure Richard is going to be a great resource to help you understand about the mind, about learning, about education, where you can begin the process to make changes for your child. And then in the process, you will become more mindful. But if that seems like a little bit too much for you at this moment because your plate might be very full, if you can spend an hour and get some coaching. It doesn't have to be with me. It could be with another wonderful coach that I had on Coaching in Session. It could be with a local coach that you have in your city or your state. And then you can begin the process to learn how to be more mindful, how to be more present. And then you're going to start to notice just how much your life begins to change and evolve into a different light. So I encourage you to find mindfulness, to find awareness, and to learn how to live in the moment, because children learn in the moment. They don't learn in the past. They don't learn in the future. They learn today. So what can we do today to ensure that they get the learning that they so desperately need? My name is Michael Rearden. I'm a mindset coach. If you have any questions, you can email me, coachinginsession@gmail.com. And I will see everyone on the next episode of Coaching in Session. Until then, everyone, take care.